Welcome back to AM Northwest. In a country where diversity, equity, and inclusion have become hot-button issues, our next guest wants you to consider the impact of competency checking. Here to share her groundbreaking new book, Qualified, we welcome award-winning executive, journalist, and author, Shari Dunn. Good to have you with us, Shari.
Good morning.
I want to also add news anchor,
former news anchor,
attorney, all of that. It's amazing. What inspired you to write this book?
You know, all of those experiences, right? My own work life, and then now I've been a consultant for the last 5 years, working in diversity, equity, inclusion, working in strategy, executive coaching, and hearing these stories and experiences that people were having, specifically people of color. I was like, wow, how can it be that an executive in New York or an arts person in Oregon are all getting the same feedback or having the same challenges, and they're like word for word? And so that was my inspiration. Like, hey, something is going on. Somebody's got to say something about it.
Right. Tell me what those experiences were that you've been
Sure. What they were finding is they were having pushback when they tried to lead in leadership positions. Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you the leader?
So a person of color trying to lead a group of white.
That's right.
Okay.
They were getting questions about their qualifications, their knowledge, their ability. They were finding that they're getting promoted. It took longer for them to get promoted, even though they had equal to or more skills than specifically men who were being promoted, white men who were being promoted ahead of them. They were
no one questioned the white men.
Not in the same way.
Right.
And they were getting more critique and criticism about themselves. You're too direct, you're too angry, you're too dominating, you know, and they were all getting these same types of critiques, you know, and feedback. And I thought, this can't just be in isolation. Well, I know it's not in isolation because I talked to lots of folks.
Yeah, you did a lot of research for this book.
45 pages of citations, because if a book says qualified and you say things that people aren't familiar with, you have to prove the information.
Yeah, give me the proof is what someone's going to say. Competency checking, what is that?
Yeah, so competency checking is something I identified as a way in which women and, well, people of color primarily, but and women in general, are required to prove their knowledge, ability, and skill over and over and over, and they're required to prove it in ways that men, and white men particularly, are not. So people will ask, well, how do you know that? Or do you really have a degree from that school? Or, you know, you could have done this project better, even though you did the project perfectly. And we see competency checking show up in entry level. So it starts with a name, as I say in the book. There has been research showing that if you have an ethnic sounding name, you're in entry level employment, you have a harder time with your resume going through, which is totally contradictory to the current messaging that diversity, equity, inclusion means you're going to automatically get a job. It doesn't mean that at all. It actually, your diversity presents a barrier, and we see that in promotions, and we see that in job retention.
Tell me about, you describe how black women are the canaries in the workplace coal mine. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's because the data and indicators for black women in workplace aren't good. They're sounding alarms that women are being shed, black women are being shed from professional spaces at a very high rate. Now, many of those women go on to start their own businesses, and people say that's great, but they're leaving because they find an intolerable workplace where they are not able to succeed. They have the MBA, they have a PhD, they have the experience, but they're not getting promoted, they're not getting through, and that frustration either sees them pushed out or see them leave. And that, to me, tells us that something is wrong in the system.
So what is causing this?
Yeah, well, what is causing this is the competency checking, and competency checking really is these unconscious and sometimes conscious ways in which, even if we're not thinking about it, we are requiring more. So a perfect example is, let's say, you know, you have an interview, right? And someone comes in, a black woman, and she's talking about her qualifications. After the interview, someone says, oh, she seems full of herself. She seems really dominating. Well, if you
as opposed to confident.
If you have, first of all, you're in an interview, so isn't that the time to talk about yourself? And you need to ask yourselves, do we have that same opinion for a man or even a white woman who came here and talked about herself? Do we have that same feeling? And it is those things that are creating blockages. So what I tell people is the pipeline of talent in professional spaces is not empty or broken, it's blocked. It's blocked by our assumptions about who's qualified, and that makes it seem like there's a trickle on the other end, right? Because either consciously or unconsciously, we are holding Black folks in general and other people of color to a higher standard to succeed. So there's data from the Economic Policy Institute that shows that Black folks with a graduate degree or experience tend to be underemployed, meaning they're in jobs that are not commensurate with their education or experience.
Right. I'm going to bring up some show business stuff that I find just unbelievable. Beyonce wins Country Album of the Year. And all over social media is she's not a country singer.
She's not qualified.
She's not qualified. What does that say about the state of the United States? Is that more white supremacy? Is that you're not country because you're Black? I mean, what is?
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think that is?
It's a combination of all those things.
Yeah.
I think it is a situation where
you're not qualified.
You're not qualified. It's all of that. You know, there's a lot of our history that's hidden. So that's one thing. So the role of African Americans in the development of country music is not apparently widely known. The development of the banjo, that on plantations in the South, African Americans played violin and banjo and guitar and all of the instruments and developed much of the sound that ends up being country music. But that's like, people don't know that. And also it's like you don't belong in this space, right? So she's in pop, so she can't be in that space, and yet she's from Texas, her father's from Alabama, her mother's from Louisiana, which she famously said in the song. And you have someone like Taylor Swift, who was from Pennsylvania, who was in country music when she started, won awards in country music, actually transplanted to Tennessee. So, but there was no outcry at that, right? So what's the difference? It's because there's a perception, a gap about where Black people belong, and that is competency checking. You don't belong in this space. You're not competent to be in this space. Just a quick aside, there's a rapper, T-Pain. I talk about him in the book. He writes country songs, and he said he stopped signing his name to the songs because he would get such racist abuse when people found out he wrote the song. So it's these ingrained assumptions that you don't belong in this space, and therefore I'm going to competency check you out of this space.
Wow. It's fascinating. The book is Qualified. Shari Dunn, you have a book event, but it's all sold out. So it's all booked up. That's great. And congrats on the book launch. Starting today. Today's the day. Qualified, Shari Dunn. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away. Thank you. Very